It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the future of internet art. I feel like this is a very big panel topic, and I wanted to start with the question, what is the internet, actually? Because it's a word that's come up a few times today, and it's a word that does a lot of ideological heavy lifting that doesn't often get unpacked because we think of it as such a familiar term. But in fact, when you start to unpack it, you realize that the internet is both a sort of set of technical ensembles, which are very disparate in and of themselves, involving software and hardware, different kinds of radio signals and cables, and all of that is very complex. And on top of that, it's also a bunch of different social and cultural practices, which is one reason why at Rhizome we never capitalize the word internet anymore, because we don't like this idea of mashing all of these disparate meanings of the term into one sort of godlike proper noun. So I want to introduce another term for us to use in this panel, which is the word platform, or online platform. An online platform is defined by the EU as a software-based facility for the exchange of goods, services, and content among users. That's a pretty good definition. Good job, EU. Thank you for doing my work for me. But the platform is a very persistent concern within artists' relationships with the internet, because so much of our activities that happen online are mediated by software-based facilities, and so much of what we do is exchanging content and sometimes goods and services with other users through these facilities. So even though the internet is always changing and it's multifarious and will continue to change in the future, these different kinds of relationships have had a certain consistency over time. I've got a slide up behind me showing an image from the archives of The Thing, which was founded in New York City by artist Wolfgang Stahle in 1991. Is Wolfgang here? Couldn't make it, I guess. But The Thing was basically a bulletin board for artists and activists, and it was basically a computer that you could dial into with your dial-up modem and exchange files. Sometimes these files were artworks, such as the ones you see on the screen. Sometimes they were just messages. But this is a platform, a very early one, before people were even really using the web. And so as artists and as different kinds of cultural practitioners, there are certain kinds of positions with respect to the platform that one can make. You can make your own platform. And that's what Wolfgang did, and that's what people continue to do. Even things like Tumblr and now New Hive are examples of platforms that exist as sort of cultural projects. You can choose to critically intervene into existing platforms. So you can try and glitch Facebook or Twitter, or you can make different kinds of responses to them. You can try and make these platforms visible. A great deal of the work we see in galleries responding to the internet is an effort to make the workings of these platforms more comprehensible somehow. You can refuse and come up with alternatives, which is something that was discussed in the previous panel. Or you can participate in ways that forge solidarity or other kinds of relationships that might sustain community. And that's a different kind of thing that happens too. So I like the word platform in some ways. I do think it has limitations because the things that happen on platforms tend to be really emotionally and libidinally charged, to the extent even that Jerry can now smell the activities through his screen. So this is like a highly libidinal situation that's happening out there. So the word platform, it sounds like platforms are bits and bytes and whatever, but actually it's just all about sex or something like that. So this is something that I think we need to bear in mind when we use the word platform, that this is like human life mediated by software-based facilities for the exchange of goods and content and services. So I am very pleased to be joined by 4 cultural practitioners who make various kinds of gestures with regard to platforms in their own practices, and I've asked them all to prepare a sort of short opening statement or just remarks about work that they do. And we'll start on the far end to the very far end. That's Constant Dulart, winner of the Prix NetArt, a jointly presented prize for NetArt that was given this year. So Constant.
Thank you, Michael. I'll read out the text. I hope to remind you that I'm not a native speaker, but I'll try to pretend like I am. Art for me exists to promote a radical perspective on reality by way of conscious disinformation, highlighting reality as a potential oppressive construct. This, of course, can be done in many different ways. An efficient cultural expression validated by its consumers by way of activating social capital into monetary capital looks to be the greatest social achievement currently available. This is why Daltech is an ambivalent tech company intended to resist the startup excitement in our current culture, using Kickstarter as a medium to reflect on neo-colonialist tendencies in tech culture and hijacked morals made to capitalize on social capital. Daltech, a play on my surname, and an awkward self-aware startup got to be successfully funded, a successfully funded Kickstarter staff pick against my wishes. This image is a still of a video made for $5 in Indonesia. To consciously exclude any party, in this case workers in lower wage countries, from a discourse consolidates the inclusive, the loyal community, the dominant culture into stigmatization of the excluded or unconsciously ignored. This potentially prohibits the possibility of counter-argument, poetic response, the polemic, the stupid, and growth. A necessary part of art is to provoke, to do the wrong thing, to challenge, to break the rules. Moral values need to be validated by way of challenge. Irony, sarcasm, parody, all of these things are figures of speech, tropes. Even ambiguity can be a function can function as a challenge to an oppressive culture. If Putin's web brigades can use it for propaganda, it can be used to create art within the contemporary landscape. Progressive reflection by way of collaborative inclusiveness can offer a critical context. But to maintain a form of autonomy facilitating a fruitful discourse implicates the right to say the wrong. To twist established values, be they experienced as oppressive or not, to a cringe. People are still introduced, even at this conference, by quoting corrupted social validations on neo-imperialist commercial platforms like people's followers on social media. Some people might know that I have bought tens of thousands of followers as a performative artwork commissioned by Jeu de Paume in Paris for people on a previous panel. And they were quoted to have a lot of followers, so that was hilarious. The lols continues. Yeah, lols can be art, that's all I'm saying. And I'm currently controlling an army of thousands of resurrected Hessian mercenaries fighting the current social media revolution, normalizing social quantification on Facebook. Perhaps this is the online militia that was just referred to in the previous panel. So it's already happening. This is hopefully illustrating with limited visual means that it is up to contemporary art to use contemporary material, like the startup, Instagram followers, Facebook bot armies, you have it. The future is inclusive by way of imposed self-censorship, socially incorporated by way of follower counts, and in deep need of the polemic. Contemporary challenging artistic materials create an opportunity to control the context in which an artwork is consumed, enabling us to create or reclaim our own platforms, be it balconies, manifests, a Facebook army, or a startup. Thank you.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question before we move on, because I think your position is quite nuanced, and I want to make sure I get it. But I think that, it seems to me that you are critiquing these platforms and saying they're corrupt, that the follower count is a corrupted form of social validation. And you are upset that you got a Kickstarter staff pick for your Kickstarter video that you made for the money you raised on Kickstarter. So you're threading a real needle there. Is it fair to say you're participating in these platforms as a way of critiquing your own position as well? And is it really about kind of taking them back, or do you believe that there's that possibility that you can
Reclaim?
Yeah,
Reclaim that space. I think it is a reclaim if you would see, for example, also responding to a previous panel, if you would start to see using these platforms or these existing platforms as an actual privilege that is given to you in exchange for the things that are that you need to give up, like privacy or whatever. And I think I think in that sense, like to reclaim is often, I don't know. Like I think this is the challenge to reclaim that artistically, and this is, and of course, like I'm also critiquing my own position because I am like a user. I'm about to like, support another product that is launched on Kickstarter. Like it just happens.
Okay, so the last thing I just wanted to say is that you kind of emerged as an artist in the mid 2000s, or at a time when many artists working on one were very excited about the possibility of blogging platforms, and many people launched things like surf clubs, such as Nastinets, of which you were a part. Has your relationship with platforms changed since that time? Was there more of a straightforward exuberance about the idea of self-publishing online and reaching new audiences, which has now become more of an ambivalence, or did you always have this feeling of ambivalence about platforms, even in this early?
No, I feel like there was much more freedom at that time. I feel like we were like jamming at that time. Like we could jam on each other's posts, and we could. And I feel like right now, like for a lot of the people that were involved in these platforms, our cultural expressions are much more quickly commodified, and like is actually threatening like a freedom of expression for a lot of people. So yeah, I think my involvement or like my ideas about that did change too.
Yeah. They evolved as millions and millions of lines of code were added to Facebook.com each day. Yeah. Okay, let's move to Peter Russo of Triple-Canopy. Peter?
Cool. Thanks, Michael. Before I want to begin, I want to just point out that the description of this session includes a quote by Oliver Laric, and so I feel implicated by that. Laric's work concerning North Korea workers is exploitative, and I'd encourage others to reconsider their support of it. I want to start by saying that I'm here also on behalf of 23 artists, writers, and technologists based in New York, LA, Berlin, Mexico City, who together collectively embody Triple-Canopy. For those unfamiliar with our work, Triple-Canopy is a magazine comprised of digital works of art and literature, public conversations, exhibitions, and books. We also develop our own software and have built 3 publishing platforms to date. I'm often asked if magazine is the best way to describe an organization that is, for all intents and purposes, medium agnostic. My response is that what defines Triple-Canopy as a magazine is not bound pages, but its editorial approach. That every project, whatever its final form, is the result of a lengthy collaboration between contributors, editors, and designers. Since 2008, we've published and presented the work of 850 visual and performing artists, poets, novelists, and scholars. Currently, we're preparing the 22nd and 23rd issues of the Triple-Canopy, one devoted to standards and disruption, primarily edited by Alex Provan, and another devoted to the contemporary Vanitas, edited by Lucy Ives. In my capacity as director at Triple-Canopy, I do a good number of things, but my editorial work tends to focus on collaborations with artists who have a studio or research-based practice. Triple-Canopy has a reputation as a platform for artists to write and writers to make art, and while I actually don't believe or place much value on those categories and distinctions, one could say that is very much the case for Matt Sheridan-Smith, whose work You Can't See Any Such Thing is projected here. In form, You Can't See Any Such Thing might be described as an interactive fiction, a text-based game in which players use commands to control characters who navigate a simulated environment, a sort of literary video game that dates back to the 70s. It's worth noting that this is Triple-Canopy's first long-form digital project that entirely breaks from the horizontal movement of our article layout system, meaning that it's designed with its own organizing principle and interaction in mind. Not coincidentally, we refer to this as a white cube project. As you can probably read in the screenshot above, Matt's game invites the reader to navigate through the biographies of 4 characters, a World War II pilot, a Tour de France cyclist, a champagne magnate, and, spoiler alert, Katie Holmes. The scenes function on the basis of observation and description rather than action per se. To make these observations, you employ your senses, or rather their literary equivalent. The game was originally conceived by Matt as an operating system for an exhibition and ran on a computer terminal positioned in the middle of the gallery. Matt's intention was to provoke questions about the viewer's access to his otherwise mute artworks hung throughout the rest of the space. A complicated power play between text and image, one struggling to precede the other, a compromise that many of us make when accessing contemporary art through criticism. The piece was subsequently written, rewritten, and expanded for Triple-Canopy over 2 years. One of the most challenging aspects of the game's development was ensuring it would be engaging from a literary perspective and a gaming perspective, which we accomplished, I hope, by setting up a kind of three-way symbiotic writing between player, author, and software environment. There's more to say about it, but I won't be able to do the game justice through description, so check it out next month once it's published. So I had a panel about the future of internet art. Why offer Matt's project as an example, one which borrows from a mode of gaming that saw its heyday in the 80s. Why reach back now? I want to answer by reading a line from the game's introduction. In it, Matt writes, "In spite of the unprecedented proliferation and circulation of images today, power is still largely consolidated in and through writing, whether via code that creates a body of intellectual property, legislation that protects it, hacking that subverts it, or news that narrates it." In making a work like You Can't See Any Such Thing, Matt seeks to engage those power dynamics, right down to his choice of a command line over a graphical user interface. Internet art, debatably more than any other medium, so much as it can be distinguished from any other medium, is inextricably tied to these concerns. For instance, a minor browser update can debilitate a project. So the presentation and care of internet art by organizations presents a double bind. Backed by a small team of media conservators, a work may extend its lifespan. With the help of a curator, it may develop or find new publics. However, when you import the metaphor of the magazine or museum to the internet, you're bound to drag in at least some of the same competing value systems, inequalities, and dynamics which inevitably shape and inform the art being presented. So clearly a balance must be struck between an institution's engagement via digital and IRL platforms. And I view this as part of the work Triple-Canopy is doing. Triple-Canopy and its contributors are certainly not immune to these issues, but then again, we're a relatively small organization, and our status as a kind of, quote, provisional institution will hopefully clear the path for others to do better work and be better supported for it. When I asked Matt what he thinks the future of internet art might be, he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "A lot of digital art merely crops and represents the internet, while art that behaves like the internet is endlessly versioning itself. It's difficult to speculate about the future of internet-based art because its specific methods of accruing value won't translate over time. The internet is anathema to historicization, while visual art, on the other hand, can't shake its history." I then reminded Matt that Triple-Canopy's partnership with NYU Fails Library means some operable version of his project would theoretically be accessible as long as NYU exists, which begs the question, who gets to decide what art survives and why? I asked him about the possible mistake, quote unquote, of trying to graft mainstream contemporary art's hierarchies and valuations onto internet art. Name recognition and single authorship are, of course, highly prized. To which Matt replied, optimistically, I think, "In the future, it's not that there won't be another David Bowie, we just won't know that she or he is in fact the greatest musician." Like so many of the projects published by Triple-Canopy, You Can't See Any Such Thing is always necessarily incomplete. This work of internet art, quote unquote, actually encompasses a handful of exhibitions over 2 continents, dozens of paintings and sculptures, 2 asynchronous versions of the game, plus projects by Matt yet underway. Not to mention, importantly, the relationships between the people who helped foster its development. So in other words, a challenging prospect for any bricks and mortar institution to collect and preserve. Any future presentation of the work would necessarily be full of plot holes. Or as Matt put it, this may be a work best misrepresented. As Matt put it, this may be a work best misremembered. Thanks.
Okay, and now Shanae Michaeline Holloway, artist from Chicago.
All right, well, this is not a picture of my work, but it's kind of a picture of where I work. I feel so incredibly fortunate to kind of like come after all of the panels that we've seen today because I'm so overwhelmed by how much I connect with these ideas through this in particular thing. The thing that maybe struck me the most was the sentence of like, you know, Black people are not a stranger to surveillance. When I started working with the browser, I kind of was feeling, well, unwell people or branded ill people or handicapped people are also not a stranger to surveillance. And then another thing that came from the first session in the social media panel, there was kind of this offer of like, if you don't feel like you're able to contribute to social media in a way that's like maybe professionally or emotionally fulfilling, like don't do it. And at the time that I started making art like super seriously, I was not walking, and I had all sorts of other sort of plethora of problems. But this was the space. Like anything I could access through this browser was the space that I felt sort of emotionally capable of existing through at all whatsoever. And I couldn't exist in public space. So where could I exist in the browser? And also how could I exist in the browser? I know I needed to, exist in financial economy, so I became a cam girl, and I started producing a lot of just content that I didn't necessarily think of as art quite yet as a cam girl. I also existed as a friend, like on social media. I existed as a body where people were identifying me in certain ways that I felt that I could kind of like understand and digest through this right here. I make a lot of noise music. I make a lot of video. I make a whole bunch of things that are extremely aesthetically distinctive. But I come back to this space right here, and maybe not Safari, maybe it's Chrome, maybe it's Firefox. Like you said, like a browser update can like severely disable a browser or a whole project. But regardless, we're accessing this whole new world through this portal or through this window right here, which is also a language that we've created to kind of like access like a window or a portal. And again, calling back to maybe the first panel, like Juliana was saying, we started using this internet network in order to gain escapism. So my work really comes from the point of view of, where can I gain power, but also like what powers are kind of imposed upon me, and where can I handle that power, and where can I sort of decentralize it in ways that I can control. Like it's kind of something that I'm trying to grow out of, but my work is so extremely formalized. But it was kind of coming out of the fact that like control was the thing that I felt like I didn't have. So maybe because I couldn't go to work, I could control like my financial income by becoming a cam girl, which then kind of, as I generated all of this video and generated all of this content, like I could feed back into this other thing that I was doing, this art thing, and mash these two together. And the only way I knew how to kind of contribute productively was to kind of synthesize these things. But the power, of being surveilled, the power of contributing back into that surveillance and kind of like actualizing myself as both an artist but also like a person was super only enabled by this piece of like wear on my computer. Yeah.
I was so surprised to see this image.
Yeah, you were.
I was like, oh my God, is this a whole body of work I know nothing about? We had to have it. We had to talk. We had to talk it out. It was good though. But I think one of the productive things about it is that it sort of like immediately calls to mind Robert Rauschenberg's white paintings for me. And Rauschenberg is, of course, that gives us the title of today's event. I've always loved those works because they're such a conceptual gesture in some way, although it's not part of the heyday of conceptual or the conceptual art moment, to show paintings that are white as a way of calling attention to the gallery environment and all of that sort of thing. But also white paintings as a kind of response to the machismo of like Abex in New York City at that time. So here we have, your practice has taken shape around your practice as a cam girl, and the image that you're showing is one in which you feel like it's impossible to offer that image possibly to this crowd that way?
Yeah, I do feel like it's impossible to offer this image, not only because my work extends so much beyond the body that is recognized mostly as being a cam girl, but with this effort of like trying not to let the kind of powers that were surveilling me kind of like IRL. In the beginning, like I'm not going to let, like, maybe, I don't know, an aesthetic obfuscate, is this word that I'm looking for, obstruct, the fact that my work really is starting from this point. Because when you present cam girl imagery, you know, you have to think of sex. That's what they're there for. That's what I was there for. You have to kind of, like, it automatically objectifies me both on screen but also in person. And that disables my control over how you see me. Part of, like, what I don't necessarily have online, but I do talk about in interviews and other spaces, is the fact that I completely radically changed my appearance in order to participate in a music culture that I wanted to participate in, which is noise, which is very, like, male space. But that sexualization of me in that noisy male space, just as a woman in general, I had, like, big, curly, beautiful hair. I was like a beauty pageant queen, Miss Illinois, you know. I cut that off, and I cut my hair off. Like, I don't have any hair, you know. And that's kind of the reason why I picked this image, was that, like, sterility or that blankness that I think you come to expect and also, like, feel within images of, like, I don't know, desolation or nothing is important for me to kind of regain control over, like, what I am, how I'm represented.
And you find that control through platforms like XTube.
I do. So I hope you all journey into XTube at some point at your own risk. It's this amateur, well, not always amateur porn site that's mostly has, like, gay content on it, although it's open to everybody. This was actually super out of necessity using XTube. I upload a lot of my videos there that can't go on other places like Vimeo or other places where, like, my body doing XYZ things, even though it was particularly art, was not allowed to be. Not only that, I was really participating in this. I did do, like, online domination for money, and I felt it disingenuous to present what I was making out that was coming out of that community on Vimeo. Like, I was like, okay, y'all are gonna see this, but you're not going to really benefit from the codified kind of language or like tools that, you know, I was using, and that's really what I was in for. You know, I needed to find people through that browser in order to make meaningful relationships with. So XTube came to me.
So we have different kinds of relationships here playing out among users and platforms, and even in this room. So with that, let's move over to Colin Self.
Hi, guys.
Came
Okay,
in on the J train.
I'm glad that we used this. There was, like, some debate over which slide we were going to use, and then they sent, I think I'd sent this earlier, and it kind of made its way back to me, and then I realized how appropriate it was for kind of talking about how I guess my relationship to platforms, which is in some ways, I think, echoing some of the things Shani said about creating a space and sort of implementing or worlding worlds or making the thing that you want to see in the world. So this is from, this is actually a screen capture from a Kickstarter video from 2012 for a opera series and tour and USB bracelet that I was making. That's a part of, like, a multimedia opera called Elation that is also around my neck right now, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I guess, yeah, should I talk about those 4 words first? Those will come back later. So I'll start by talking about, I guess, Clump, which has been a kind of spearheading project for me, or helped me kind of find my place in New York. So I started Clump when I moved to New York from Chicago in 2010. Clump was a monthly queer party and performance platform that was based off of a temperament and community I'd known at Chance's Dances in Chicago, something I couldn't seem to find the equivalent of a queer space that was not concerned with impressing others the way so many New York spaces seemed to me at the time. Drag was also beginning to enter a renaissance, and having come from a background of not traditional drag and drag history, I was more interested in the performance of drag over say, the aesthetics. More importantly, Clump was a place where my friends and I could, place that my friends and I created to have fun in a time and place otherwise where we wouldn't have had in New York. And this kind of is something that aligns with a lot of projects of mine, which is is often taking the things that I've learned about community organization online and then bringing that into physical space, often kind of like, or even what's happening here. So I think that that's also a big part of that for me is also breaking down maybe what seems like the binary between the URL and the IRL, and that there's somehow still this strange mythology associated with those things being so far from each other. And trying to open up spaces for both participating and creating dialogue around these things. So Clump splintered into a few different projects. Besides being a party, it then also became sort of the foundation for something called Clump TV, which was a TV show, or also funded by the Rhizome Commission grant, that sort of was able to take a lot of the media or the people who were involved in this community and bring their media and their voices and onto the internet, and then also back into real life in these ways. Then Clump also, because it was sort of like a very beneficial part of my life where I felt as though I was receiving so much support, and I was feeling such a strong sense of community, we started something called the Radical Diva Grant, which sort of was the money that we would make from throwing this party would then be funneled biannually into an artist grant that would be given to people who are working on community-based projects in different places, some outside of New York. So I guess I should switch to talking about Elation, which is an ongoing project of mine that has sort of really changed its shape based on the circumstances of what is happening in the world. It started in 2011 with a performance in Philadelphia, and then this image of me you're kind of seeing, this is like before I went to Europe, and these 4 words, invite, participate, help, and execute, a lot of it is about creating an invitation for people and just using the platforms that otherwise might be used against us to bring people together. I think a good example of the invite and participate is kind of a big thing that came out of Elation is vocal ensemble. As my interest in like cognitive activism and the idea of the attention economy came into my life, I started asking myself how creating media or in what ways performing could be a potential device for working against having our attention co-opt by different terrible things, like, you know. Anyways, so singing, bringing people together to sing somehow radically changed the way in which I was thinking about Elation and making operas when I became aware of the fact that a lot of these people who are coming to participate in the choir really just needed a physical space to do these things, and not turn off per se, but in a way to kind of engage with these communities in physical space and actually use something like the voice. And execution, I think this is, so 2 other little things I wanna maybe touch briefly upon are like something called How to Survive Winter in New York, which is a Google Doc that I started 2 winters ago when a lot of my friends from New York were moving to LA, and it became this question where I was like, well, if we have this sort of like awful algorithmic thing set up in Facebook where we're kind of being like pushed into each other and away from other people, what is a way to create a document that could potentially become a way for people to find wellness in many different forums? And so hundreds of people kind of started contributing to this and sharing it. And anytime I log in, I'm always kind of surprised how there's like a ton of those little like indicators as to how many people are viewing it. And then another thing is Colin's List, which started kind of as a joke where I was like, it would be really great. I was like, because I'm a working artist and I'm traveling all the time, it would be wonderful if there was something a little bit more involved, or I guess from within my own community, a way to bridge people who are looking for a temporary housing while working on a project so that they can exist within an economy that otherwise would be too expensive for all of us to do. And through that, it's kind of now helped me and many friends and other artists kind of create these projects in different places that they otherwise wouldn't get to. I don't know if I should just go back. Is that, yeah. Let's just do that.
We have so much to talk about already. This is going to be
Yeah.
impossible. I think you very usefully did a couple of things. You reminded me of Kathy's point earlier about using the internet to create different kinds of community. We're going to talk about that. You also usefully reminded us of this binary of IRL and URL, which is this really long-standing cultural paradigm that we think of cyberspace as happening over there, and we think of cyberbullying as being distinct from bullying, even though it's just bullying, right? So, this is a problem. But yet at the same time, there are like specific affordances of platforms. And I think one of the things that platforms do to our communication is it sort of accelerates binaries. It is accelerating binaries right now about putting people against each other on different sides of many kinds of arguments. One of the binaries that I think has been interestingly discussed in the world of internet art this year, but maybe also not that usefully discussed, is the binary between conceptual art and performance art. And Rauschenberg, again, is such a great figure of drawing on both of those vocabularies. Constant, I think you're someone that draws on both of those vocabularies as well, actually. Constant has a video where he moves the DVD insignia around on the screen, like in the way the screen saver does. It's a nice conceptual gesture, but it's also Constant is quite a good performer too. Is this something you've consciously done in your work? Because in internet art, we do have this, there is a kind of official history, which is internet art comes out of a conceptual art lineage. And then you see things like Constant and Mendy and Keith Obadike's Blackness for Sale would be another problematic point in this history, or this distinction between the two.
Well, I think the important thing is to highlight that internet art was also came from a pure frustration with mass media and with controlled mass media and commercialized mass media, and to actually to resist those tendencies and to self-publish and to create platforms also created the environment to publish in a way that maybe people got bored with later when publishing was so available. And I think the tendency to commercialize communities or to make money from communities, I think now is something we should still resist, because it's the tendencies that these former commercial media used. And to reflect on the previous things basically the compliments you just mentioned or you just gave to me, thank you. And I think that's very nice, and I think I really endorse your description of my video and my performance. Thank you.
Okay, I'll pick up my check after the panel.
Well, it's a very small Mechanical Turk kind of...
2 cents, yeah. Peter, I wanted to move to you because you made a statement in your opening remarks about Oliver Laric's quote. Can you describe so we have Constant on the end, he's actually a Chinese hardware manufacturer. There's definitely ethical concerns that should be unpacked there. Peter, you mentioned Oliver Laric's project. Oliver is someone who has been very involved in articulating a conceptual vocabulary around, collaboratively authoring work online. I think even when you use the word versioning, you're drawing on Oliver's vocabulary, and I'm not clear on the specifics of the point you made. So can you elaborate?
Okay. So Laric has a series of sculptures that are produced by North Korean workers. Laric's work is marketed on the contemporary art market. Obviously, there's an imbalance in power there, and there's certainly profit to be made. Of course, there's nothing wrong with making money, and I don't mean to suggest that Laric is somehow racist or whatever. It's just a misguided project, in my opinion.
I think it's interesting because the implication is that artists need to be responsible for the ethics of all the labor in the production chain, which is, I think, a very valuable question to raise. And then, I'm interested in your perspective on it, Constant, as someone that also...
No, I was actually, this is maybe why I started that the artists would need to formulate the arguments to challenge certain value systems, and this could also be done by obviously and conscientiously doing the wrong thing. And I think this is something which I mean, next to my personal relationship with a friend, I think this is something I really support, and I think this is something that I think the responsibility of the artist would need to be to give the handles to see that work as shining a new, like giving a new light or a new perspective on a very oppressive reality. But yeah, I do think that this kind of recontextualizing of a certain practice that is maybe accepted by a lot of people because they just don't know that it exists. It's maybe sometimes really beautiful to bring that to the limelight so that people get the tools to reflect on it.
I do think that Oliver doesn't, to the same degree that you do, Constant, put himself in front of the work. He doesn't necessarily perform his own subjectivity in the work very often. And so maybe it's not as easy to understand his own ethical relationship with North Korean workers. Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, it's hard for me to say because I do it very obviously. Like I play the buffoon, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, and maybe it's just like yeah, he doesn't play the buffoon like that. But I do think he doesn't shy away from the discourse. So I think it would be It would be much more interesting to involve him, actually personally, into a discourse like that than to just speculate on this.
True. Well, now we have a bit more of the context, which I think is useful. But it did sort of remind me of something that we've all been seeing happening online this year and recently, which is that there's a social media. One of its ramifications is that we make statements without having the opportunity necessarily to add nuance or context and that sort of thing. In fact, earlier this year, I gave one of Rhizome's writers a copy of Kenneth Goldsmith's Capital. And it was a gifted young thinker. He's really cool. And Kenneth Goldsmith has been at the center of conversations about race and appropriation and has consistently claimed his work as belonging to a conceptual lineage and not acknowledged the importance as much of the performance of subjectivity happening in it. So the writer took this beautiful book from Russo and posted a clip online of himself throwing it in the trash. And I saw it and I was like, oh, why did this have to happen to me? But I think it was like a gesture that was meant to sort of accelerate maybe this binary that had been set up. But I thought it was interesting, Shanae, you talked about your own work as being very formal, even though you're working in this performative way. And I wonder if you could speak to, the way that you see this relationship between conceptual practices and performance in your own work. Is there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm going to address exactly.
That's fine.
But, kind of in following with this, like, what is this line of production and, like, what is, like, how is the artist implicated in, I guess, the making of their own art and what kind of implications does it come if they make it themselves or if these other people make it themselves. Mm-hmm. I've made all of I've been featured in all of my art for, I guess, the reason that, I'm really sorry, let me back up a second.
Yeah. Well, you come from a different, your work is very much about this sort of, you're talking about these, it comes out of this practice which is really about economically sustaining yourself in
yes.
a certain way. And so performance is not just, as it is for Colin, it's not just a space of community, but it's also a space of economic
right, exactly.
incentive
Well,
for you.
it's really important actually when talking about this work. The series is called A Personal Project. To actually mention that all of the footage that is of me is paid. Except for one video, actually, which I can talk about later. But that was an interesting moment for me when I realized that not only was I being sort of paid financially, which was actualizing me as a person, but I was also being paid to make art, which was this other really cool thing that I was discovering to possibly be a new model of sustenance for my functionality in the art world. That sort of conceptual, I guess this is what you're asking me about with the conceptual and performative relationships, but in that way it was really important for me to also keep that work out of maybe traditional art platforms like Vimeo and things like this. And that was, I guess, an active decision, an active performance, because you know, the money wasn't coming from there, and I wasn't really operating in that space conceptually. I was operating in that other sort of like underground, more, I don't know, community-based thing, and I didn't want to take like the labor of that community, which is often marginalized, and like take it somewhere where I was being privileged for that particular labor.
So there's like a translation of value that happens when you move the footage from that original context into this art context.
It does, but I mean, it sounds self-absorbed, but like it also has like a direct translation of value on me as an artist as well, and I was very conscious of that, and also my own kind of like subjective ways that I see ethical practices within art.
And so, Colin, you talked about like things like using a Google Doc, and this is like really the most basic tools that we have available to us. And do you see it as a sort of ethical position to use like really readily available software materials in your work? Like, would Colin's List ever be like a social media website or something like that?
I mean, I made it a Facebook group with like kind of some contention of thinking about like how that even kind of starts closing it. But in general, I personally don't find it helpful to try to remove myself or the things that I'm doing, or from the places that might say like the resources or the things offered to me through Facebook or another major platform or even software that way. Because those things, if those things are kind of already intrinsically involved in so many people's lives, that it would be kind of like without the presence of those things, then it's not, I wouldn't want to say that I'm not going to, it wouldn't be helpful to use those things. Or, and I'm a strong advocate also for trying, I'd like a project called Saga, which is sort of like a hosting platform for your media that you can then say post something on Facebook, and then see who is seeing it, where they're seeing it, the context in which the media is being viewed, and then you can also modify the media that's being presented. So I think that's like a very helpful way to try to think about, instead of trying to withdraw completely from these different mainstream or like mega platforms, to sort of like infiltrate and still participate in a way that is the way that you want to participate.
So there's these serious power imbalances, and some of us have responded by participating in ways that try and reclaim. Others have tried to make independent platforms. Some have tried to forge community within these spaces, and others sort of find economic sustenance within them. I would argue that sort of looking to the future, all of these different positions will continue to play out in different ways as the platforms themselves continue to evolve. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that all of the practices that we're starting to unpack today are all really specific to the platforms we have now. And someone was talking in previous panels about how there's link rot. Jerry was talking about link rot. But the fact of the matter is that we make often content or gestures within platforms, and then maybe the content or gesture sort of remains in some sense, but the platform software is being updated daily. I mean, Facebook is pushing updates to that platform constantly. So the behavior of that content is never going to be really the same. And I wonder if that's something that you guys think about, and maybe if this is a useful time to bring up the fact that when you publish something on social media, like, to what extent does the magazine metaphor apply? Or is this actually a performance that we're making when we publish in software platforms today? So this will be the last point, I think. When you publish online, is it like publishing to a magazine, or is it like performing something that really can't be recaptured?
Right. I mean, so we don't publish work to social media. We publish on an independent platform that we built ourselves, and that was important to us, to have control over the context in which the work is viewed. Anybody who's ever looked at a Triple-Canopy project knows that there's it's a very I like to think, a very kind of like considered venue in which to read literature or view art, and that's very intentional. And it's not just an aesthetic thing, of course. Were we to just, customize WordPress or, just begin to post exclusively on Facebook or develop projects for Facebook, we just wouldn't have the same kind of control, and we would feel accountable, I think, for that and to the contributors.
So the magazine metaphor is made possible only because it's an independent platform in some way.
Well, the magazine metaphor comes, again, I'm proposing that is primarily, that's about the editorial approach that we take to the work.
How about you, Colin? What do you want to be left of your Google Doc about surviving New York winter in 10 years?
I hope that it at some point it gets its own life online and becomes its own thing. I think it's great to sort of, I've talked to people about publishing versions or printing a physical copy and putting it into some sort of document that could be kept. But then, at this point, I feel like it's as much mine as it is all the other people who've participated and shared it. So in 10 years, hopefully it's helping people. I'm trying to think of what would be bad about sharing information for wellness, but I'm not too keen on that.
How about you, Shanae?
Yeah, I find it really weird that we're talking about conserving these platforms or these projects within platforms mostly accessible through that browser thing, because when we it's cool, but when we talk about, I guess, the future of technology, we think seamlessness, and we think of returning to the body, or at least not making it super hard for the body to do stuff with the internet, and I'm actually super curious to see where my work goes in this way, because what happens when there's no browser, what happens also when I can't hide maybe, or when I can't have that kind of control, and that control interface is me, where do we go, but also where do these documents go? Are they in us and circulating around? Will that promote our power? Do we get to call up wellness tips,
Yeah, I think information sharing, or it's the question of how information is shared in the future.
But I think it's actually, I was interested in it because I think what you're doing isn't so much information sharing as community building. And maybe the word community isn't quite right, but it's more about, the way I see it, a specific group forming around this document than it is about the information therein, which probably is going to be badly dated in 10 years. Come on.
Yeah.
What is the New York winter even going to be like in 10 years?
I don't know.
Yeah, but that's super weird too, right? If you're thinking about community building and I guess the seamlessness or the disappearance of technology, how my work in particular on XTube, this is a subculture, right? So where will all the kinky people go to
Well, good, in London right now, because they have such high limitations on certain sex things that you can watch online. It's now started this thing where in places in London, people are returning to physical types of bars or meetup places where they have codes and all of that. It's starting to then trickle back into the into physical spaces, because if it's being regulated online, you can just do what you've been doing for the last 4,000 years, it's still right there.
So we have all these subcultural practices happening, publics and counter-publics forming online, and the memory of these is something contested and not necessarily stable. I want to ask, what is the role of the institution in this field? Because we've been talking about platforms. Is an institution a platform? Is a platform an institution? And how should institutions refigure themselves around the problem of supporting or intervening in or archiving these kinds of community practices in the future? What is the role of the institution with regard to the platform, Peter?
What is the role of the platform with regards to the institution? I can answer by connecting these two conversations, because as Shanae was speaking, I was thinking about the degree to which Triple-Canopy's platform is interactive. interaction is really limited, I think, to like our live events or conversations among editors and contributors. Very little of that sort of interaction is happening online, I'd say. But I think if your question is about what role do institutions play in it's cool. In maybe like supporting or promoting this work, I mean, I think the opportunities to write and to historicize the work are perhaps the most important. I mean, I think there are significant challenges, of course, to preserving the relationships between media, and it doesn't seem like this will age well. I mean, I'm often reminded, Marvin Taylor from Fails in conversation recently referred to present day as a kind of digital dark age, or at least that's how we'll look at it from the future, when we spend most of our time like digitizing books rather than working out these questions of how to kind of preserve relationships between media, not just media online, but also interactions face-to-face, interactions between digital and print. I don't know, that's where I put my money if I had an institution.
If an institution is a stable and recurring and valued set of practices, the internet changes the way we are able to value practices, and it also has changed the ability to keep them stable over time. So it really does propose a challenge, but I think more crucially to internet art, and I'm going to end with Constant here, more crucially, internet art, as we discussed, it's something that has always been in the hands of artists who want to reach an audience or public or community without necessarily having recourse to an institution. And now, Rhizome is 20 years old. Triple-Canopy is a very considered sort of small institution as well, and there are all these different institutions which are really taking themselves seriously as stable, valued, and recurring practices over time. They're now kind of getting in the way of this field to some extent. Maybe facilitating, but it's different, very different than in the 90s when you had the thing as one kind of context among many overlapping contexts that no one necessarily could, no one necessarily would have used the word institution at that point in time. So has this emergence of the internet art institution radically changed the field of internet art? Will it continue to? Is this just a temporary sort of moment of institutionality for the field as a whole?
Yes, and I also think that it's actually, I just want to highlight the work that actually, maybe you can say, but like that Rhizome is doing on archiving and making all the works accessible, which is amazing, and which is acknowledged which I think it should be even more acknowledged. So I do think beautiful work has been made there. I also want to briefly just touch on the fact that the things that are happening and the censorship which is happening in the UK is something to publicly resist, and not to just find other means, but to actually fight against this kind of oppression. And I also think that this, like to think about internet art. I'm often, there's like very little people that still call themselves video artists, I think, because they're just contemporary artists, and I think this is going to happen, and I think it's a beautiful moment in time where we can actually still discuss the medium-specific qualities of the internet, and I think this is going to fade away, and it's going to be beautifully fade away, but it's also really good that it's being recorded by institutions like Rhizome. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thanks. My timer just went off. I think that means that it's time to say thank you to our esteemed panelists, to all of you, and to the amazing staff here who put this all together.
Thank you, Michael.
I think we have a lot to talk about over a drink. What do you guys think? Is there an after party?